Okay, so hi, good morning. Wait, we'll wait until time. Okay, so we were learning yesterday about the importance of working instead of making oneself dependent upon others. Now, with all of that said, he now gives the other side of the story. He says, "V'yesh," it's in the previous statement. Good morning. In the previous statement, he had said that, like the Shulchan Aruch had told us, that a person is obligated after his davening to go out, and after his Talmud Torah in the morning, after his shir, to go out, or his chavrusa, to go out and make a living. And any Torah that is not accompanied with derech eretz or malachas, with work, sofa b'tela v'goreres avam, it'll eventually get lost and it'll cause him to sin. And he's making a chilul Hashem and a bizayon haTorah, and a disgrace to the Torah by making himself dependent upon others to support his learning. Now, with all of that said, now we have the flip side. V'yesh omrim shemuter l'chacham v'latalmidav l'kabel aspaka min hanotnim. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, asafka or spaka, like a stipend. Some say that it is permitted for a wise man and his students to receive a stipend from donors. That through that, they'll be able to engage in Torah study, berevach, meaning with a breath of spirit, meaning that they're not going to have to worry constantly. Right? You might remember I quoted this pasuk yesterday, that there's a pasuk that says that it is a time to act for God. They have loosened your Torah, meaning that there are times when a person needs to compromise on certain values if the Torah is in danger of being lost or forgotten. One such example, it would be this situation. Yes, it's truly a core value for every person to be self-sufficient, but if the Torah is in danger of being forgotten, if we don't have full-time Torah scholars, then we can certainly justify having people who spend their entire day learning Torah and accepting charity in order to be able to do so. And that was really, like I mentioned yesterday, that was really the calculus of a number of Gedolei Yisrael after World War II, especially. Torah is in danger of being lost through assimilation and the brokenness of the Jewish people after the Shoah, where 1/3 of the Jewish population was exterminated. And because of that, many Gedolei Yisrael said, we need to set up Torah centers and support them financially, even if it means that some men will end up not having, not working, but instead receiving tzedakah. Whether, so the success of that endeavor eventually became its failure when the social structure became so overloaded with people whose value was that you're not part of this important endeavor unless you're learning full time. And working became an ethic that was discouraged and looked down upon. So then that became, at some point, it went too far, right? And now we're seeing it correcting itself. We're seeing society correcting itself. But unfortunately, in Israel, it's taking much longer than it's taken in North America. So we're still seeing pockets of communities where it's very hard to convince people that they have to be industrious and try to leave the Beis Medrash at some point in their lives, so that they're able to live lives of dignity and not in squalor. She'ilu lo haisa parnasasam shel hamalamdim v'halomdim mitzuya lo hayu yicholim litroach b'torah kiroi v'haisa torah mishtakachas chas v'shalom. He says the reason for the justification of accepting charity for these institutions is because if these teachers and their students would not have parnasa, they would not be able to study Torah with the proper frame of mind, and the Torah would be forgotten. Umikol makom rabbanan v'talmidehem yashisu eineihem lechavod haTorah. He says, however, rabbis and their students, members of a yeshiva, members of a kollel, have to always focus on the importance of kavod haTorah, of the honor of Torah. And when they come to wealthy people to receive tzedakah, yizoharu lebal yizalzulu ba'atzmam uleval yisnahagu b'tzura she'ena mechubedet. They have to be careful not to disgrace themselves or behave in a way that would be unrespectable. In other words, a lot of times people become overly obsequious and fawn themselves over donors in order to be able to get money for the yeshiva or to get money for the kollel, and they will behave in ways that are duplicitous, shall we say. Ki milvad onsham, because not only will they be punished for that, but zohi harisa satorah v'chilul Hashem ka'asher halomdim yechalu ashirei ha'am laseis lahem. But it also results in a breakdown of the Torah and a disgrace of Hashem when Talmidei Chachamim flatter wealthy men to give so that they'll give them more tzedakah. So Moshe, we're giving equal time to the other side as far as why you're allowed to accept charity for people to sit and learn full time. So but he says, but even Talmidei Chachamim have an obligation not to be duplicitous and fawn themselves over wealthy people. So that's an important point. You got to be real. And if there are some people who will sort of throw themselves at wealthy people and make themselves into, whatever. Okay. Mishi yachol hitparnes heitev mimase yadav v'gam la'asok b'Torah. If a person is able to support himself responsibly and also study Torah, midas chasidus hi umatas elokim hi. This is the most saintly level, and it's also a gift from God. In other words, shkoyach to you, if you're able to do that, to become a great Talmid Chacham and also be self-sufficient. However, he says, we recognize ach ein zu midas kol adam. He says, but that's not the way of most people. She'i efshar l'chol adam lasok b'torah lahachkim ba v'gam lihisparnes ba'atzma. Not everyone has that ability to be both a Talmid Chacham and also to support himself at the same time. I would only, and he's quoting from which sefer here? He's quoting from the Ramah itself in Sif Chaf Aleph. So let's we were doing Reish Mem Vav in the Aruch HaShulchan. So that's 246. In the Aruch HaShulchan. We'll take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan as well on this matter, which is interesting because it's written before World War II. Maybe he has a different perspective. Part of the problem is that we created a system. When I say we, whoever were the Gedolei Yisrael, created a system whereby it perpetuated poverty. It didn't give people the opportunity to even attempt to become self-sufficient, because so much pressure was placed upon people to stay in the Beis Medrash, and that if you left the Beis Medrash even for a few hours to go ahead and get a job, you were condemned. It was like you were looked down upon. So then it really put a lot of pressure on people. And not everyone is meant to be learning full time, right? So we can find a discussion on this. He's a little bit later than that. He's actually after the Mishnah Berurah, because he quotes the Mishnah Berurah at certain points. Okay, so he says, here's the paragraph. V'lachein kol ish Yisrael chayiv b'limud haTorah, bein ani bein asher, bein sholem begufo, bein bal yisurim, bein bachur, bein zaken gadol. Everyone in Israel is obligated to study Torah. Any male is obligated in Torah study, whether he be poor or rich, whether he be healthy or disabled, whether he be young or old. Afilu ani hamachzer al psachim, even if he's a poor man going door to door to beg. Afilu bal isha ubanim, or he's a balabas who's got a wife and kids, and his wife tells him, I need you to put the kids to bed and read them a story and do homework with them and help me at home. But he comes home from work at 6 or 6:30, and he's got to have dinner. I was just speaking with someone, and I think this is worthy of your attention. Someone was saying, we were talking about the difference between the modern, or what's called the modern Orthodox community, and the yeshiva world. And in the yeshiva world, a value is placed on Torah study, so that a guy who spent many years, let's say, learning in the Mir or learning in Lakewood, he will go and get a job after a certain number of years of Torah study. And at the end of the day, when work is done, he comes home at 6:30, maybe sometimes even 7. He sits down, has dinner, spends a half an hour to an hour with his kids. And by 8:30, 9 o'clock, he's back in the Beis Medrash or in the Kollel, in the community, learning with his chavrusa for an hour, and then he goes home. That's a value that is sort of embraced in the yeshiva world, even among working people, right? That value is not embraced for whatever reason in the modern Orthodox community, so that you can have a shul with a Beis Medrash like ours, and it's the exception and not the rule who will make it a priority to go into the Beis Medrash every night to be with their chavrusa or whatever the situation is. And that's sort of part of the problem of why we see that disparity. And that's a value that is, I guess what I would say is, it doesn't mean that the people are bad people that are not going back to the Beis Medrash every night, but it sort of is disappointing that that ethic doesn't exist in our community. And to whatever extent that we can try to bring that ethic to our community, it's a worthwhile endeavor, right? And how that's accomplished and how we can do that, it's not so easy to do, and especially because there are other competing mitzvahs to do. So, for example, a guy who's raising his kids can very easily justify it and say, look, my kids need me to do homework, otherwise they're going to flunk out. I've got to spend time with my kids. My wife and I need some time together because we never see each other during the day. Or I sit on the board of the school and the shul, and I've got one night a week for the shul and one night a week for the school. And those are equally important as having a chavrusa. So there's always ways to really, and so it's not necessarily that we're saying that it's that it's wrong, but at least a certain percentage we would hope that would be able to participate in a base medrash program. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to revive that spirit even within a non-yeshiva community. Okay. Every night, sure. That's what we have the base medrash here for. We have the Turk base medrash. It's always open. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a value also, especially now that you can find so many things on your computer. I spend a large chunk of my day in my office at home on my computer where I have tens and tens of thousands of Sfarim, right, connected to my computer at home. Okay, and that's why I take this home. I plug it in to my Otzar HaChachma, to my Bar Ilan CD. They're all there. And that's how I prepare my shiurim and all the other stuff that I'm doing, right? So, yeah, it's just that, you want there to be in every community a kol Torah. You want there to be the sound of Torah study reverberating through the walls of the community institutions. And that's what we're trying. We want to try and sort of encourage that. That's sort of a goal, a long-term goal that we have to really try to focus on. Anyway, so therefore, afilu bal isho banim, even a guy who's married with kids, chayav likvo lozman l'talmud Torah b'yom uvalayla. He has to set aside time for learning, both during the day and at night. Shenemar behagisa bo yomam v'layla, as it says, you shall toil in it both day and night. Kolomar chelek liyom v'chelek l'layla. One portion of your Torah study should be during the day, let's say in the morning, and the other portion of your Torah study should be at night. I know also a lot of people, like including myself, after 9 p.m., my brain is toast. Yeah. And it's always been that way. I'm an early riser. It's just that I've conditioned myself to get up in the morning, have mental clarity at an early hour. And then, but by 9 o'clock, it's really tough. So hopefully we can improve in different areas. He says now the simple import of that pasuk is to be engaged in Torah study constantly, because it says yomam v'layla, day and night. K'divsiv mikodam lo yomam sefer haTorah zemipicha v'hagisa. This is a pasuk in Sefer Yehoshua. God says to Yehoshua, do not ever allow the Sefer Torah to leave your lips, and engage in it day and night. He says, so if you were to take that pasuk literally, it would seem that you have to learn Torah 24/7, or at least during all your waking hours. But that's not possible for people who are engaged in parnasa. And it's only for unique individuals in every generation. Amaram Zal, as our sages say, lo nitna Torah ela la'ochlei haman. But the Torah was given to people who had manna fall from heaven. And it was done so. In other words, what is the Aruch HaShulchan saying? When you're the first generation of a people who are constructing the Torah for their community for the first time, God creates miracles so that you don't have to work, so that you can absorb the Torah, and eventually you'll pass it on to the next generations. But for that incipient, early, very beginning generation, they need to be freed from all daiga, from all financial concerns, and that's why God caused the manna to fall. But that doesn't apply to every generation. And it's because we had no parnasa concerns in the desert, there never was and there never will be a nation who was capable of having that intellectual infusion the way that the generation of the Midbar had. Because they had no parnasa woes. They learned every day and every night. And so therefore you can imagine when God speaks to Yehoshua, he's basically telling him, that's the way that's what you're used to, Yehoshua, because you were living in the desert. And I have to encourage you to try your best to replicate that now that you're coming into the land of Israel. You got wars to fight, you got fields to plant, you got children to feed, and you got to worry about Parnassa now. You won't be able to do it in the same way that you did it in the desert, but do as much as you can. Aval kegon anu, but we, he says, achiyav likvoa itim l'Torah. All we can feel a sense of obligation towards is to set up times to study Torah during the morning and the night. Eis bayom ve'eis balayla. One period in the morning and one period in the night. V'chein sho'alim oso la'achar pitirasa. And that's what a person is asked after he passes away. It's one of the first primary questions. Kavata itim la Torah. Did you set aside time for Torah study? V'zehu shekasav Rabbeinu harama b'sif aleph lashona. And that's what the Ramah says at the beginning of this section of Shulchan Aruch, which is the laws of Torah study. B'shas hadachak afilu lo kara rakriyash mashachris va'arbis lo yamushu mipicha karinan bei. He says, in a dire situation where a person really doesn't have time, then he fulfills the imperative of don't let the Torah leave your mouth, even if you just recited Kriya Shema that morning and that night. In other words, even if that's all you accomplished for that day, because you didn't have time for Torah study and you were on the run and you had to run from this plane to that plane and it just was a crazy day, or from that appointment to that appointment, at least the fact that you recited Kriya Shema in the morning and the night, you still have fulfilled the bare minimum of this mitzvah. Ad kan lashona. Kolomar, im ye arem mikre rachok kegon shetarud beyom hazem ma'od. So he says, that's what it means. He says, if you were very busy that day, and it was an unusual day, kamo biyarid v'chayotze bo, like it was the special, like Yarid is like you have a convention, or it's an unusually busy business day, like you go to Vegas for a show, right? And you got to be up at 6 a.m. to set up your booth, and you don't finish until 11 p.m. that night, seeing customers and stuff. You know what that's like. I mean, there are days like that. We've all had days like that, where the business really is so demanding for that one day, there is no other option. Okay, so Yatsa Yidei Chavaso B'Kriya Shema, you've at least fulfilled your obligation of Torah study by reciting the Shema. Sheba Nemar Dibarta Bam V'Shivtecha V'Veisechu V'Lechtecha V'Aderechu B'Shoch B'Cho V'Kumecha. He says, and then he tells us in the parentheses, he says, take a look at the Gemara in Menachos Tzadi Tes, where it says, V'nira li degam Rabbi Yossi spirale d'shnei kavanos b'mashma, ha'echas b'pshuto kipshuto, v'asheni b'kvias itim v'chumoshe kasavti. So apparently there's a different way, I guess the Gemara in Menachos that he's quoting here. I'm not sure what Gemara he's making reference to over here. Rebbe Yossi, let's see. Where's Rebbe Yossi in this Gemara? Okay. Let's go back up. Oh, Amar Rabbi Ami Midvarv Shel Yossi Nilmod Afilu Lo Shana Adam Ela Perak Echad Shachris Uperak Echad Arvis Ki A Mitzvahs Lo Yamush Sefer HaTorah Zemipicha. even if you only learned one paragraph. In other words, he's talking about the showbread. He's talking about the lechem hapanim. Is that you can never allow the table to be empty. However, even if the priest removed the old showbread on the morning and arranged the new showbread towards evening, so that temporarily the showbread table was empty of any bread, you still have fulfilled the mitzvah that there must always be showbread on the table. Talking about the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash. That was standard procedure, but according to Rabbi Yossi, if you took off the old one and you left it empty for a few hours and then you put the new bread on a few hours later, you still fulfilled the obligation that table was never empty for an entire day. So what you see from Rabbi Yossi's statement, says the Gemara, that with Talmud Torah also, the Torah says you should constantly be learning. That means every day you got to learn something, right? But it doesn't mean that every single second of every single hour you have to be studying Torah. So that's what he's quoting from this Gemara. He says, "Ha'echas kipshuto v'hasheni b'kviyas itim ch'moshe kasafti." You see from Rabbi Yossi that there are two meanings to the verse. One is try to study constantly, and the other one is to try and set up time so that even when you have to be doing other things, you've set up a situation where not a day goes by when you haven't studied Torah. V'chein tevas tamid. And obviously, the ideal is to always be studying Torah, but when that's not possible, you fulfill your obligation by the second interpretation. Okay, we're not going to get into that now. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to see so far from the Aruch HaShulchan. So that there is an obligation to study Torah, but there's two different ways of interpreting the mitzvah of let not the Torah leave your mouth at all, ever, Okay. So if a person can make a parnasa and also become a high-level Talmud Chacham, that's the ideal. And there are people who do that. There are people, many hundreds, if not thousands of B'nai Torah today, who will work for Goldman Sachs or some other, high-income venture. This is the new Lakewood, right? Where they encourage the guys, go for some kind of high-income business, like working for a brokerage, like a Goldman Sachs, investment banking, law, where you can go to school and get your license for a certain amount of time, and then you'll be able to spend half your day learning Torah and half your day doing something that will give you a high yield. And it's what a lot of guys now are doing in the New York area. It's quite remarkable, the revolution that we've seen in this regard. And so you can have really affluent balabatim who are also Talmidei Chachamim. It's an incredible thing. If I had a chance to do it again, who knows, that was, but it's a new generation, and it's really, really quite remarkable. Not everyone can do it, obviously. You have to be very industrious, got to be very smart, but it can be done. Okay. Nagu shaharav shel ha'ir yesh lo hachnasa me'anshei ha'ir kedei shelo yitztarich lasok b'malacha b'fnei habrios. The minhag is that the Rav of the city gets a salary from the members of the city, so that he will not have to engage in work in front of other people. B'tispaze haTorah b'fnei ha'hamon. In other words, we're talking about in communities like in Europe and in Eretz Yisrael, where the shul does not hire a Rav, but you have a Rav Ha'ir, you have a Rav of the city. Now, what does the Rav of the city do? People might think, well, he doesn't do much. I never get a chance to see him, all right? But he will engage in pastoral services, life cycle services, and the like. It may not take his entire day, and he may be spending a large portion of his day studying Torah, but the community still should feel an obligation to support him. Why? Because even though theoretically he could spend a large chunk of his day working, we don't want the Rav to work. We want his Torah knowledge and what he represents to be held in high regard. So if he's going to be working at the Makolet and stocking shelves, it's not going to be. It won't be the same kavod haTorah. People will not have the same regard for the Rav and for the Torah that he represents if he's working within the community. However, it says, now we'll have to continue this halacha next week. Okay, have a good Shabbos, everyone.